Hello there, and welcome to the 20th episode of the Deliberate Talks podcast. Wow, 20 weeks have gone so fast, and we're inching close to 2021. And with lots of exciting things in store ahead in the new year, and in just like today's episode, here is me, Dakshin Adyanthaya, welcoming you for a brand new conversation. But you know the rituals of the show. Here are some insights on the topic of discussion today, which happens to be data-driven customer experience. Now, according to a survey, 72% of customers will share a positive experience with 6 or more people. On the other hand, if a customer is not happy, 13% of them will share their experience with 15 or more people. Wow. The Temkin Group suggests that companies that earn $1 billion annually can expect to earn, on an average, an additional $700 million within 3 years of investing in customer experience. And a Walker study found that by the end of 2020, customer experience will overtake price and product as the key differentiator. And while there's a lot in store today regarding the same topic with our expert, join me for the same after this intro.
This is the Deliberate Talks Weekly Podcast, powered by the Pixelated Egg Digital Ventures. Tune in every week to learn something new about digital marketing and entrepreneurship. And now, over to the voice of your host, Dakshin Adyanthaya. Enjoy the show.
So on today's episode, we have someone who has more than 12 years of experience in analytics, consulting, and data-driven digital transformation. He's currently helping his clients across Southeast Asia adopt and maximize value from Adobe's data-driven experience management solutions. Here's welcoming Gaurav Kumar. Hello, Gaurav. Thank you for making it to the Deliberate Talks podcast.
Thank you so much, Dakshin. It's a pleasure for me.
Great. So let's start our conversation on something that you expertise in, data-driven CX. As simple as it sounds to the ears, what does it mean and how did your role evolve in this field over the years?
Yeah, sure. It's been quite a journey for me, actually. So I started on the other side of the table wherein, I started with consulting a number of organizations across the geographies, primarily focused in the US region, and then I cut across APAC markets. And I started consulting heavy on the consulting side of the business, wherein I was really driving this agenda with the clients telling, hey, there is a value in terms of adopting a data-driven strategy in the organization. Right. And slowly over a period of time, I realized that as I moved across organizations and came on the other side of the table, while we have been talking a lot about data-driven practices, and when we talk about having, what do you really want to take out of a data-driven practice, that is, it could be a marketing strategy, it could be really an organization change that we are talking about. But over the years, I realized that what has become a central point of conversation for the brands and marketers across is experience, right? Because nowadays, if you talk about any organization, whether it is a B2C company, whether it is a B2B company, the central focal point of conversation is really about having that experience and getting closer to customer experience. Mm-hmm. Now, as I realized that, and of course, if you look at all the questions that are coming out of how everything is getting more and more automated, how is that customer experiences are really changing across different devices, there is a multiplicity that is happening, there is a complexity that is happening. I realized that the issue and the gap has been that whether you're talking from a consulting point of view, or whether you're talking from a brand's perspective, the focus has really been, bottom up, right? And say there has always been an approach of saying, hey, can we go ahead and create a data-driven output? So build an analytics model, right? Mm-hmm. And then probably try to use that for some sort of insights and decision-making so that we become better at customer experience. But when you look at design thinking as a principle, right? And that should be the driving principle for when we talk about data-driven strategies. What it essentially says is that you to start sort of top down, but keeping your end outcome in the center or your consumer in the center. So if you talk from a design thinking principle point of view, it becomes really, really important for you to start from experience and make experience your business rather than saying, you will have data, you will do analysis, you will come up with insights on a regular basis, and then you will try to scale experience. So after I had this realization, I think I have really become very, very cautious and really become very, very, I would say, cognizant about the fact that from a business success perspective, from a marketeer success perspective, it is really, really important that we focus on keeping experience in the center, right? Because I'm then talking about the different bits and pieces that need to come together able to, in order to be able to sort of build this strategy, execute this strategy, and on top of that, scale this strategy. So considering that, I have done quite a few changes in my job roles, and then I'm very excited where we am right now in terms of really helping some of the bigger brands in terms of having a scaled perspective around how do you bring experience into the business, and that has to be supported by one data, but there are also other components, which is processes, people, and there has to be an organizational change that need to happen.
Mm-hmm. Right. Another part of experience involves best practices of customer experience management. And, it revolves around multiple factors like understanding a customer, establishing a clear customer vision and a roadmap, delivering an experience that translates into an authentic value, and ideally motivating customers with emotional connection with the brand. Tell me, how does data kind of stitch all these experiences together?
Sure, that's a great question, right? So if you look at everything that you're talking about, or I'm talking about in terms of the components of CXM, you'll see that there has to be a common factor that connects different. So, typically there has to be a layer that talks about connecting all the experiences, because it's essentially a feedback system, right? So the good thing is the whole thing moving towards digital, becoming a digital first, mobile first businesses, and the consumer behavior is getting driven by handheld devices, and everything is getting digital, and digital is that everything is one trackable, and then there is plenty of data. So when we talk about experiences, actually the physical evidence of those experiences, right? Whether you talk from a technology perspective, whether you talk from a strategy perspective, the physical evidence of that experience across the touch points is data. So when you're talking about a scalable solution for CXM, right? Data is the glue. It essentially is the basic layer that connects every single touch point. It gives the holistic view. So data is, I would say, the foundation layer. And then depending upon the technology stack that you would have, depending upon the vision of an organization that you would have, you will have different layers built on top of that data layer. That is, it could be an application layer, it could be a services layer, it can be a proper intelligence layer driven by number of applications, algorithms, or different sorts of technology components, so to say. But essentially data is something which is really connecting the dots from both one execution perspective, but other also from the feedback perspective, because every single thing, every single footprint, every single activities, every single interaction in the digital perspective is really, really traceable, right? And that's the biggest advantage of how is that you can scale your sort of experience, customer experience management that we keep talking about. So I would say that's the basic foundation layer.
Right. Another aspect of customer experience is actually personalization, right? But this is where the organizations lack the tool for, or kind of stitch together the data streams to gain a complete customer picture, combining their transactional data with their behavioral data, for instance. So as an individual or as an organization, how do you work together to solve this problem?
Yeah, so when we talk about personalization, and I think this has taken some time for people to decipher this, is that there are two components of personalization. So one is outbound personalization, and another one is inbound personalization. So when you talk about any of the mediums such as advertising, which is completely, you are placing an experience on a component or a property that you do not own, and that's an outbound perspective of where you can stage up an experience for a customer. And there another one is inbound personalization, that is when people reach out to your properties, when they interact with your apps, when they interact with your websites, what is the kind of experience that you're bringing together. Now, the whole personalization piece, I think, is moving more and more towards productization. What it means is that when we talk about one-to-one personalization, it only means that you need to have one-to-one experience in terms of understanding your holistic profile of your customers. But it doesn't mean that it needs to be done only for few of your customers, right? The whole idea is that this personalization need to be scaled for entirety of your customer base, for that matter, right? Because consistency is important. So I think, it has become completely productized. Automation has a big role to play into this, right? And when you're talking about bringing all the data sets and interactions together, I think the whole intelligence layer that exists across, sort of connecting the technology stack in the organization, and extends to really connecting the silos that exists in the organization in terms of people and processes. So that's really, really important. And, experiences are connected. So there is data that is connected at the foundation layer, and then there are experiences that are connected on the top layer. So how do you move from building a unified profile of your customers, understanding everything about your customers in, real time for that matter, really understanding the feedback signals that you're getting across touch points, and how is that you have a delivery mechanism to sort of build that gap in terms of making sure that the way your data is connected and the way you understand your customers, the experiences are also one connected, but also orchestrated in the right way. So the building this whole foundation, and that's fundamental.
Mm-hmm. And how do you maximize AI and data analytics to kind of enhance the customer experience while achieving operational efficiency?
Yeah, so as I said, if you look at most of the most sought after products that are, leaders in CX or data-driven CX, if I could say, everybody has an AI engine that is running in the background. And it is important for the purpose that one of the scalability, right, which is really, really important. Say, for example, if you look at, some of the few years earlier, you would realize that all the efforts were really about building the best predictive models, right, for example, which is about saying, hey, how much intelligence can you gather about your consumer and then try to build the best model, spend a lot of time. And what it essentially meant was that you would have the time to insight. Your journey from getting data to reaching to the insight was pretty long, right? And over a period of time, the realization is that the decisioning engine in the organizations, right? If you're talking about data-driven decisioning from a experience personalization, whether from a, any strategy execution point of view, it is important that there is one agility in that. And the second bit is that it has to be faster. Mm-hmm. So to enable this, right, to do things at a scale one, and second is to reduce the time of insight. It is important that there is an artificial intelligence engine that is running in the background. There is a machine learning that is, really self-learning and looking at insights that usually humans would not, because of limitations and trade-off between how much effort does it need, whether you are getting the signals or you are at the right time to receive the signals so that you can act and decipher those signals. So I think the role of AI is really, really important. And what I understand is that over a period of time, the brands have really, really moved through, when they talk about digital transformation, this is really about reducing that time to insight, because people have really invested and there are big stories there are success stories, but there are many, many stories of why data-driven initiatives fail in organizations. And one of the most important factors behind that is that the realization of saying that this data-driven strategy or data-driven personalization or data-driven customer experience needs to be system-driven, right? Because unless you have a system that can support that level of scalability and automation, it's going to be really, really difficult for you.
Right. And extending the conversation on AI and the automation part of it, it's interesting to talk about it from a personalization and automation point of view, especially when it comes to the emotional understanding. So what are the capabilities you think when it comes to emotional detection to help brands connect better with people? And do you still think automation can seamlessly collaborate with personalization for the same?
Yeah, that's again a very interesting question, and there are conflicting thoughts when you talk about the trade-off that happens between automation versus really that personal connect. So I work for a hospitality company, right, and I was trying to drive data-driven strategies in a hospitality company, and if you would realize, hospitality is a sector wherein there has to be a focus on personal connect of the people. But even in those industries wherein there has to be really, really, a personal connect from your consumers from that point of view, and these industries have been really hesitant adopting the machine level based, automation and personalization that we are talking about. The real problem there is that, one, the realization that there is so much about your customers, right? Mm-hmm. So there is only so much that you know about your own customers. Now, there is a lot of data about your customers that you don't even control. So whatever you're thinking from a personal connect perspective, I think it's just a half of the picture, even lesser of a picture. So even though you have a great, sort of people service, even if you have a great, I would say, a customer experience management, a manual customer experience management strategy, but you fall short of really getting the entire picture of the customers because you just don't own those information. And with everything that is happening in terms of consumer behavior change, it has become important for you to know the complete picture. And if you do not, then the problem there is that while there will be a trade-off for sure in terms of saying that how much you can, for going back to hospitality example, there is of course a difference between you serving as a or receiving somebody as a front desk, for example, and greeting with your all the human emotions versus a beautifully personalized video or a beautifully personalized email message for that matter. But the problem is that this trade-off is really against the fact that for how many customers can you do it. I think the advantages of the scalability that we are talking about and the advantages of the breadth of data that you can analyze, right? Because if you really stick to manual, though, you would have a very, very individualized, personal, human-based interaction or experience for a customer created, but that might not be just complete, right? So because you have only like X number of data points that help you understand about that customer. So both from one breadth of data and information around the customers and journeys, but also with from the perspective of how scalable this can be. I think the trade-off is really worth exploring and adopting, right? So that's what my thought is.
Okay. And again, when it comes to automation and personalization, there are companies who have integrated data and experience already, or has been doing this since a lot of years, or is in the mode of doing it right now. How do you see these companies take it to the next level to achieve more success?
Yeah, so as I said, the whole transformation thing that when we talk about, and there are some very good examples to your point of companies which were, say for example, old companies for 100 years, and then they went through a transformation exercise. And, the whole idea there is that how much are you really willing to look at that change? Because I've also realized that bigger brands, bigger companies, and, companies with a legacy have been really obsessed about the way they think about your customers.
Mm-hmm.
And what that leads to is essentially saying whatever approach we have been taking over the years, that is kind of baked into our strategy, and people are reluctant about going through that change. So once the company starts taking initial steps and sees some changes that is happening in terms of either the processes or probably an incremental benefit from the business side, sometimes it is a very breakthrough perspective wherein some of the companies realize that they have done a complete overall a pivot of the business in terms of saying that, hey, we were not doing anything on digital, and then it is great. And if we can reduce our, for example, offline call costs, that is say call center costs, for example, and move all your traffic, move all of your experience engagement and management to digital channels. Now, this is a huge cost benefit paradigm that changes in the organization. And then the adoption becomes really, really easier. And then there are companies which would take some baby steps in terms of saying, hey, can we at least, sort of improvise on one of the processes that we are having right now, whether it can be a marketing organization, it can be, say, for example, any of the internal cost centers for the efficiency gain and all of that. So, for every other company, I think there is a maturity journey that they have to go through, right? It really depends upon, I think, as we're talking about, more than technology and more than, automation and artificial intelligence, the role that people have to play now is that how do you really adopt to saying that, hey, this is the right thing to do? And that whole organizational change takes a lot of time. So some of the companies they do well in phase 1 and phase 2, and they take a step. Some of the companies are really breakthrough saying that, hey, this is the thing that works. And then they really go very, very aggressive in terms of making right investments, getting right people, and building right stories about their brand and say that we are a data-driven brand, we are a digital-first brand, and all of that. And there are some companies which would go through a cycle of saying, starting up, getting some advantages, then they lose the momentum, and then after a few years, few cycles, they again try it. But it's really a mix of how much can you really accelerate the different levers that you have to in order to sort of be on this journey and that keep on getting the incremental value that you are looking for a long-term perspective. So there is no magic formula. I think it is really about one, being consistent, and second is top-level organizational buy-in in terms of saying, hey, this is the right thing to do, and no matter what, we are going to stick for a couple of years to build on this data-driven strategy and then changing all the components that you need in place to make sure this is a success.
Right. We've touched upon this briefly where you said one of the things that's a limitation is it is time consuming and the other is embracing data. But what do you think are the other things that are limitations when it comes to data-driven CX?
Yeah, I would say one thing that is, and it's more of a technical problem, but we are trying to solve a problem of customers' experience fragmentation, right? And which is saying, okay, customers have multiple touch points, customers have multiple devices, and how is that I can get a unified profile?
Right.
Irony here is that fragmentation is the biggest problem in solving this challenge, right? So, every single company would have legacy systems. Every single brand would have, multiple systems. So their CRM is on a different technology. Their, marketing automation is on a different technology. There are other components of delivery mechanism for the technologies and stuff. So fragmentation has been a bigger problem. And while this only sounds like a system-based fragmentation, this actually translates into team-level fragmentation. This translates into strategy-level fragmentation. For example, as a brand, is your focus on optimizing and doing more on the media side? Is your focus more on really going back onto the CRM systems and making sure that your customer relationship management is something which is really, one, in terms of technology, it is latest. Second, I think it is integrated in terms of the decision making, and what's the balance? So this fragmentation, I think, is the biggest problem. And if you look around different kinds of companies, whether you're talking about the bigger tech companies in the world, bigger marketing tech companies, or you're talking about consulting companies, agencies, everybody is struggling now. It is because as much as they want to solve this problem of fragmented consumer identity, the problem is that there is an issue in terms of the systems. And even the marketing technology companies are pushing for having multiple fragments of system. So you have a choice, you have to make a choice, and either you want to replace your existing systems, or you have to find a way to integrate. And in an ideal scenario, most of these systems are either competing, or not most of these systems were easy to integrate with each other. So that becomes sort of a bigger limitation. And then there comes a question around saying, different departments have different KPIs, different departments have velocity. For example, the content teams would have a different velocity that they expect. The data teams would have a different velocity of output. And by the time you make an insight decision and give it to content for optimization, content team says that, hey, this is already late, right? So the fragmentation really translates into the way teams work on a daily basis. And then it also really sort of, I would say, goes up and rolls up into the higher level strategic decisions. And it really comes as a translation, sort of limitations wherein the leadership teams, the decision maker would have to be limited in terms of saying, okay, rather than really orchestrating this across as a unified approach, let's go ahead with the priorities based on individual silos, whether it is a system silo, or whether it is a people silo, or whether it is a team silo.
Nice. You spoke about devices as well, and people are always connected to their home devices, be it their smart TVs or audio assistants or other home devices. What's the data processing like when it comes to this, and how can you personalize this data?
Yeah, sure. So this is already happening, right? So we are already in a stage wherein there are many brands which are actually optimizing on this and actually bringing all of that data together. So I'll give you a good example of Marriott. So Marriott actually did a tie-up with Alexa, and Alexa as an assistant has been piloted into thousands of their properties. And if I collect the data right, but there was an article in the press that talks about it. And the whole idea is that when you talk about experience, the experience is, let's talk example of any of the journeys, customer journeys for any of the companies, whether you talk about retail, or whether you talk about hospitality, whether you talk about airlines, whether you talk about financials, right? So the consumers expect that the experience is really, really 360 degree. And when you talk about 360 degree, then because we are really, really integrating with so many devices in our daily life, that data becomes critical. So from getting the data from sensors is, I think, it's easy. Of course, there's enough technology right now. Now, what is rather difficult and what is difficult to adopt is that how is that you really bring that IoT data into execution or a delivery mechanism, for that matter, or delivery flow. So for example, if you are really looking at, say, home assistants, if you're looking at something like an Alexa, if you're looking at devices, right? There are companies which are already doing this optimization, saying, for example, if you are a guest in a hotel, once you stay in a hotel, you would have, so for your preferences in terms of what you watched on Netflix, what was your temperature of the room, what was your temperature of the shower, and all of that. And this data actually gets collected, right? And all of these preferences get stored. And next time when you're going to visit those different property or the same property in that brand, then you are going to be presented with a relevant one settings. So just imagine once you have an honest stay experience next time, you already have your aircon working at preferred temperature, your water is heated at a preferred sort of heating level that you would expect. So it's really becoming very, very integrated. And from a data collection point of view, I think it is more of a strategy question and realization that at what point in time that would actually ensure that your IoT data is also integrated in your experience. Otherwise, my experience is that still there is a lot of maturity challenge in terms of consumer businesses start using IoT data, and this is really, really focused. The whole IoT analytics, IoT data integration is still very, very focused on the industry side, but I think is getting more and more traction day by day on the consumer side as well.
Mm-hmm. Right. Great. And how does the next 5 years look in this conversation of data-driven CX? What do you think are the advancements in store?
Yeah, so there have been, and of course, the automation technologies are going to get more and more traction because the need for speed, right? So that is one area wherein you will see a lot more things coming up. So whether you're talking about productizing, end-to-end data-driven, execution engine, if I could say so. So and then the things about what more data can you collect, what more experiences can you create. So there will be acceleration on the automation side of things. I think another thing which is really, really becoming prominent in at least what I see from both from clients engagement and also from where we are as a company or my experiences in personal interactions is that there is going to be a shift that is going to call for more of experiments than I would say a strategy, right? So what essentially means is that the willingness for people to I would say pivot quickly and come up with new kinds of strategies, adopting new kind of technologies, and breaking their own best practices, right, in terms of how agile you can be with saying that you can fail fast and learn faster.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and that's going to be very, very critical for the organizations, because if you realize every business, every kinds of business has a life cycle, right, and the consumer expectations are evolving daily and technology is not going to stop. So from a marketing perspective, from marketing enterprise perspective, from overall brand's point of view, I think it is going to be absolutely critical in terms of how many more experiments can you do. And you don't get into that expertise mode, you don't get into that saying living my legacy, which is important from a brand perspective, but really from a technology, from the way you are handling this whole customer experience management, you need to be very, very experimental. And somebody has to take those I would say initiatives within the organization in terms of saying what is the latest and what needs to be done. I also believe that the overall problem of fragmentation is going to be solved in coming years, and that is going to be absolutely critical for everybody, including marketeers and other companies, product companies. And I definitely see more and more consolidation coming. So I think we have seen a number of consolidations happening today as we speak in the kinds of marketing and data technologies that exist in the market. But the only way out is that there will be consolidation, and it is important and is good for both the product companies, for example, or marketing technology companies and brands, because this inherent problem of fragmentation needs to be solved. And I think there will be a lot of acceleration on this in next coming years.
Super. Great. That's the end of our first round of conversations, Gaurav. Let's get into our next segment. But before that, a quick plug-in.
Friend us on your socials and let's connect.
So Gaurav, now I'm going to move into a round of rapid fire questions. This is your moment of pace and promptness. So are you ready for this?
Yep, let's go for it.
Okay then. 3 to 5 CX leaders to follow for their content.
Well, that's a difficult question. So I usually follow a lot of people from the technology side for the CX best practices. But from a marketing side, I would say Seth is a very, very great thinker, Seth Godin, and I really follow his. I've been an avid follower of his blogs. I really follow his snippets on marketing. So I really like him. Well, for all my biases, but I absolutely love Shantanu, who is CEO of Adobe, where I work now. And just because he has been, we have a great story in terms of the way we have done our transformation. And I do definitely admire Satya for the way that he has been building the customer experience side of business and integrating the consumer side of business at Microsoft. It's been a great story. And I love the way that he has really kind of integrated the B2B and the B2B2C side of business. It's a great success story.
Okay. Tell me 3 words related to data or customer experience and what they actually mean.
Right. So personalization,
Mhm.
real time, and I would say inbound. So let me explain these. Personalization is really understanding your consumers and having an experience that is what customer would expect before they could say and talk about it or ask for it. Real time is having an experience that can be delivered or at a time when the consumer is actually in the moment of truth, either making decisions or interacting with you as a brand. And the last bit is inbound. That is really about saying any of the experiences that you can create. And this is a larger part of the experience management based on the properties that you own, wherein your customers come to you rather than you going out finding customers.
Nice. To opt for a career in data, what are the opportunities and where does one need to start from?
Yeah, so now this, I think career in data has become a very, very wider scope. And when I say that, there are actually many roles emerging. So it's really based on an individual's choice. While it is good to have umbrella knowledge of different topics into this, but it is, I think, early on in your career, if you could figure out an inclination for yourself, whether you are somebody who loves creating right kind of products and systems, or you are somebody who really wants to help a brand or a client or an organization how to use data, that is what you call as either applied analytics or applied data sciences or applied data marketing, whatever you can call it. And the third bit is really having say that somebody who is a champion of a data sort of initiative or a data product or a data output in the organization, and that has to more do towards the business. I think this takes time for individuals to realize, after they have worked for a few years in the data field. So earliest you can identify this, because I think while I'm not a big proponent of expertise and specialization, I understand that we should be continuously learning and experimenting. But I think it helps for you to go a bit deeper in one of these areas because it is just so wide. So based on what you pick, if you are, say, more of an applied data science or applied data engineering or applied data practitioner, what it means is then you have to go deeper into the domain knowledge. So it's better than you can focus on a specific domain and then go deeper to understand that business and what consumers expect from those brands. If you are on the system side, then it of course becomes more and more, technical expertise, more and more transferability in terms of saying how much you can learn new kind of skills and new products and technologies coming. And if you're on the business side, then it is good for you to, start with honing your skills around how is that you can complete the life cycle of data in an organization, because it's not an easy job for you. You should be very, very good at storytelling. You should be really good at communicating value that is coming out of data. So I think it's a very, very diverse skill set, and many of these can actually come together as you progress in your career. But I would say in early parts of the career, if you're really wanting to go on a long term in any of these tracks, then have that clarity and say that this is my focus area, while it is good to have a wider scope of learning across different disciplines.
Great. And what's next in store for you or for your role?
Yeah, so as I said, I'm pretty excited with what I'm doing right now, and for the fact that of course, Adobe is a leader in what you do, and this is, I think, a very, very relevant problem that we are solving right now. So the next step is, of course, that I have enough opportunities in terms of helping different kinds of businesses, and I absolutely love doing that. So the consulting part of my role is really about talking about this transformation exercise. So I'm also looking forward for doing more in terms of really creating impact, not just from business perspective, but even in my current role, there are many opportunities to work with, say, for example, government clients. We are doing a lot of things around this COVID situation right now. We are helping recover a lot of companies, and I think that's a great value advantage or a value addition that I'm able to bring in my current role. So one idea is to really diversify in terms of different kinds of clients in different kinds of industries. But it essentially puts me in a position right now for next couple of years that I am probably with one of the best organizations right now in terms of leading with database thinking, right? And in terms of digital transformation. So I think for next couple of years, I'm really excited to see how all of these changes that we were talking about in the marketing landscape and customer experience management landscape going to change. And I am absolutely excited to witness all of those from the forefront.
Very cool. Great round, Gaurav. Good stuff. I'm swiftly going to move into our last round of question. And this question is from a forum which states, building the teams and installing the software to become a truly data-driven organization requires considerable time and resources. This is something that you also mentioned. But do you recommend to outsource it, or if one wants to create an in-house infrastructure, how do they go about with it?
Yeah, there are too many parameters around this question, right? If you have to answer it honestly. But I think to be factual around it, over the years, there has been definitely a shift in terms of buy versus build, right? So basically, more and more organizations now either understand or they try to build these capabilities in within internal systems, right? The biggest challenge there is that it doesn't really have investment into technology, but then is a lot of cultural part of it, cultural transformation part of it that has to happen in the organization. So not everybody is successful. And to be honest, based on the size of organizations, the resources that you would have, it's also not feasible for all organizations to go and build. So it is absolutely fine to work with partners and implement this. And there is a value in this, because another point around this whole culture shift around building data-driven organizations or customer experience management by and large is that, you have to remove biases. So, there is an old saying from my consulting days when I was earlier on in the career is that the worst clients are the clients that have outsourced ideas. Mm-hmm. So what it means is that while you engage with your partners, there has to be a DNA in the organization that is about thinking about innovation, thinking about disruption. The outsourcing doesn't have to be a traditional outsourcing, meaning, you just onboarded a company or a partner to help you, and then you are just hands off. And in that case, it is going to fail. Otherwise, generally, depending upon the size of the organization, again, there are hybrid models which are successful in many, many organizations. There are completely outsourced model, but with a lot of thought leadership coming from the brands itself, has been successful. And there are some of the companies, if I'm talking about consumer businesses, which were not technology business at all, they have gone a really, really long way by building, building things from scratch in terms of capability, changing their culture. Some of the banks, you will see that in terms of digital banking, digital customer experience management, they have done a fantabulous job. So I think it really depends upon different parameters that you could have, right, in terms of organization size, resources, and all. But either of the models work. The core thing is that whether you decide to build or buy, there has to be buy-in internally in terms of saying that, hey, this is the right thing to do, right thing for us to invest into for a couple of next years, and then you've got to be patient around seeing those results.
Nice, right? Nice. That's pretty much the end of our conversation, Gaurav. And I must say, it's a very fruitful conversation that we had today. And I'm so glad that you could make time for the Deliberate Talks podcast. I hope you had a good time conversing with us.
Yes, Dakshin, thank you so much. It was a great conversation. I think the questions were very relevant, and I really loved answering some of the questions based on my personal experiences. I hope the listeners and audience would enjoy some of these conversations that we had today. Thank you so much for inviting me on your podcast.
Great. Thank you so much, Gaurav. Thank you. So that brings us to the end of today's show. If you have any feedback, feel free to share it on the deliberatetalks@gmail.com. Also subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and the social media channels of the Deliberate Talks and the Pixelated Egg Digital Ventures. Join in this Friday for a bonus episode, and until then, inspire and be inspired.